All right, good evening, everyone, and thank you for your interest in Florida Fish and Wildlife Conservation Commission's Lake Management Planning Meeting for Lake Okeechobee. It is 6 p.m., Tuesday, March 16th, 2021. My name is Jason Houck. I work for Enwood Consulting Engineers and will be the facilitator for this virtual public meeting. I'm joined today by several key staff from the Florida Fish and Wildlife Conservation Commission. Ryan, would you introduce yourself?
Yes, thank you, Jason. Welcome, everyone. My name is Ryan Ham. I work with Florida Fish and Wildlife Division of Freshwater Fisheries Management, overseeing the three lake management planning efforts on Lake Okeechobee, as well as the Harris Chain of Lakes and Kissimmee Chain of Lakes. Thank you.
Thanks, Ryan. Mason, will you please introduce yourself?
Yes, hi, everybody. Mason Smith. I'm our fishery biologist here on Lake Okeechobee, Division of Freshwater Fisheries Management, and I'm also helping Ryan coordinate the plan on the local level. So if I haven't met you yet, I look forward to. And thanks all for tuning in.
Thanks, Mason. Brendan, can you introduce yourself, please?
Sure. Hi, everyone. So my name is Brendan Hessian. I'm the invasive plant biologist for Lake Okeechobee. And I'm out there 3 to 5 days a week overseeing the contractors and surveying and things like that.
We're expecting Alyssa Jordan, who's on a prescribed fire today, but I'm not sure if she's made it yet. Alyssa, are you here? All right, I'm thinking not. Hopefully she'll get logged in as soon as she gets back and cleaned up a little bit. Baron, would you mind introducing yourself?
Certainly. Good evening, I'm Baron Moody. I'm the Regional Fisheries Administrator for the Division of Freshwater Fisheries Management. So that's a long way of saying I lead the fisheries biology team here in South Florida for the 10 counties from Lake Okeechobee south.
Thanks, Baron. Mark, would you mind introducing yourself?
Sure. Good evening, everyone. My name is Mark McBride. I am a waterfowl and small game biologist in the Division of Hunting and Game Management. My responsibilities are statewide waterfowl population management, and I do a lot of just wetland technical assistance on habitats all across Florida. Thanks.
Thanks, Mark. And lastly, Danielle, would you mind introducing yourself, please?
Hi, good evening, everyone, and welcome. I'm Danielle Kirkland. I'm with FWC's Invasive Plant Management section, and I oversee our field operations subsection statewide.
Great, thanks, Danielle. So based on our count, over 200 people have registered for this virtual public meeting for Lake Okeechobee. We would like to thank any elected or appointed officials for your attendance and participation in this meeting, along with other stakeholders that might be present tonight. This is an important meeting, and we're glad you're here. One of the things I hope you gain from the presentation this evening is information. The presentation is intended to update you, the stakeholders, on what has been done to date to update the management plan for Lake Okeechobee, and also the steps we will be taking in the future and when those steps will be happening. At this time, I would like to go over tonight's agenda. Again, we will be discussing the FWC's Lake Management Planning for Lake Okeechobee, including work done to date and planned next steps. As this is a virtual meeting and might be new to some of you, I would like to go over some of the webinar instructions and how you all can participate in the process throughout the evening and afterwards. I'll briefly discuss the purpose of tonight's meeting and provide you all with an overview of the lake management planning process. We will be discussing the public engagement efforts that FWC has conducted to date and present to you all some of the findings and how they could shape the lake management plan. I'll provide a brief summary of the next steps in the process, at which point there will be a time for you as the stakeholders to provide questions and comments to the FWC staff pertaining to this lake management planning process. This meeting is an opportunity to introduce myself and my team to you and what services we will provide the FWC and stakeholders throughout the lake management planning process. Again, we will describe the planning process, present some of the findings from the previous stakeholder engagement efforts, and receive input from you on the best approach for the FWC moving forward. I would like to go over a few ground rules for tonight's meeting. First, I want to emphasize that tonight's meeting is part of an ongoing lake management planning process. This process will consider existing management efforts on Lake Okeechobee as well as stakeholder input. We're committed to creating a lake management plan that will help guide FWC's future management on Lake Okeechobee for the enjoyment and benefit of all. Second, if you are attending the meeting virtually and plan to provide a question or comment, I ask that you be respectful to the staff and others. I think doing so will result in the best engagement and ultimately lead to a better management plan. Finally, we want to make sure that we accurately capture everyone's comments and questions. We will go through the different options available to you to provide your comments and questions both this evening and in the future shortly. But, and most importantly, we want to ensure that we have a record of every comment made or question asked. And we do that so that we're recording these questions and we can discuss them in just a moment. I'd like to go over a few technical notes. If you are currently having technical issues or happen to experience technical issues during the meeting, please report it using the question pane on the control panel. We have staff who will do their best to assist you. If you'd like, I'd also like to make you aware that this meeting is being recorded and can be made available for review. Additionally, the record will help the FWC gather information and identify themes that will be important for the lake management plan. Before we start the presentation, let's share a few items to help you better participate in this virtual meeting. For those attending on your computer, you should see a meeting control panel in the upper right-hand corner. Click the red arrow to expand the window to view controls. To listen to the hearing, your device speakers are selected by default. If you prefer to listen by phone, select phone call in the audio pane of the control panel and dial in using the information displayed. All attendees will be placed in listen-only mode throughout the presentation. The Florida Fish and Wildlife Commission encourages the public to participate in the lake management planning process by submitting your comments and questions. There are multiple ways that you can provide input. If you are attending this meeting online, you can type your comments and questions directly into the question pane on the meeting control panel at any time during the meeting. FW staff will be monitoring the comments and questions as they come in and will answer them at the end of the presentation. If you do not wish to provide your comments tonight, you will be able to submit your comments to Ryan Ham or Mason Smith. Their contact information is provided on the screen. If you are calling into this meeting, you should have received an email notification from inwood@inwoodinc.com. You can provide your comment to that email address and we will make sure that it is captured in the record. Again, that email address is inwood@inwoodinc.com. Finally, you can provide comments on the Lake Management Plan website. A link to that website will be provided at the end of the presentation. Alternatively, you can type FWC Lake Management Plans into any search engine and navigate to the Lake Okeechobee page. There, an email link is provided for you to submit your input. Please note, depending on audience participation tonight, time may not allow for responses to all comments and questions. However, the meeting is being recorded and all comments and questions will be preserved for the lake management planning effort. FWC will attempt to provide at least a written response to relevant questions received by March 30th, 2021. Again, the purpose is to seek engagement that can inform the lake management plan. Stakeholder engagement is ongoing throughout the process and FWC will continue to take comments throughout the lake management planning effort. I would like to emphasize that stakeholder engagement is ongoing and we will continue this process and we will discuss the overall project schedule later in the presentation. Additional stakeholder engagement, including time for comments and questions, will be offered throughout the duration of the planning effort as well. As you will see in the project schedule, this will not be the last time the FWC will seek to engage with stakeholders in this lake management planning effort. I want to reiterate that we can provide written responses to questions not addressed during this meeting this evening. I want to take a bit of time to discuss how Inwood Consulting Engineers came to facilitate this public meeting. Late last year, the Florida Fish and Wildlife Conservation Commission advertised contract 19/20-103 to provide stakeholder facilitation services and participate with the FWC in drafting a few lake management plans, including Lake Okeechobee. Inwood was fortunate enough to be selected for this contract. Inwood is a private engineering company headquartered in Oviedo, Florida, with small offices in Tampa and St. Lucie. We celebrated our 25th year in business last year. We employ 73 people, ranging from engineers to ecologists like myself, as well as public involvement specialists, interns, and technicians. As a private company, Inwood has taken the position to only represent public clients, mostly including municipal, county, and state governments. We provide 6 core services to our government clients, with our ecological and public involvement services being utilized for this contract. Again, my name is Jason Hauk. I lead the Ecological Services Group at Inwood and will serve as the consultant technical lead for the project. I'm working with a team of ecologists and public involvement specialists at Inwood to help FWC in their efforts with the lake management planning process. I want to highlight a few key staff that are helping me with this contract. Ben Shepard will serve as the Inwood project manager. He's a native to Central Florida and has over 13 years of experience. Jesse Bluen is going to serve as the deputy project manager. He's a native Floridian, natural history enthusiast, and has over 17 years of experience. Amanda Ashby is here with us tonight. Amanda, can you introduce yourself?
Hey, thanks, Jason. I'm Amanda Ashby. I am in charge of public involvement at Inwood, and I'll be working with all of you on this contract.
And we also have Gary Haddle, who will be leading our editing and QC efforts. Gary, would you mind introducing yourself?
Yes, good evening. I'm Gary Haddle. I work with Inwood. I'm a chief ecologist. I have 23 years background in doing environmental consulting and fisheries biology work, and I'll be doing quality control and editing and helping out with these papers.
Great, thanks, Gary. I want to talk a bit about the lake management planning process and development of the lake management plan for Lake Okeechobee. This is not a new process to the FWC. They've completed 2 lake habitat management plans to date. The first was the Orange Lake Habitat Management Plan, completed in 2016. And just last year, FWC completed the Lake Istapoga Habitat Management Plan. Both were more than a year-long efforts to gather input from stakeholders and develop the lake management plans. The lake management plan is intended to guide FWC's future management plan of Lake Okeechobee. This is done with stakeholder input in mind. As we will present tonight, FWC has been working over several months using different stakeholder engagement techniques to gather feedback from various stakeholders. The techniques include input workshops, interviews, and online surveys. Information gathered during these engagement efforts is being reviewed and processed to identify key takeaways that can be used to define goals, objectives, and actions within the management plan. I would like to point out that the scope of the management plan, particularly some of the goals, objectives, and actions, will be limited to FWC's jurisdiction pertaining to fish and wildlife resources and their habitats. For example, water levels and water quality are not within the FWC's jurisdiction. However, they are important components of fish and wildlife habitat, and the FWC does and will continue to play an important interagency role regarding these features. As I mentioned earlier, FWC has been working over several months to both present information to and gather feedback from stakeholders. Later this year, we anticipate that in-person meetings will return based on current guidance at that time and will notify all stakeholders once a decision has been made. I would like to emphasize that stakeholder input is ongoing, and we are excited to be able to share this information with you this evening. With that, I'll provide a brief overview of the project schedule. FWC first held a public meeting to kick off the lake management planning effort in February of 2020. During this meeting, they presented an upcoming stakeholder engagement opportunities to shape the lake management plan. Then FWC held several input workshops with various stakeholders. Due to COVID and social distancing guidelines, many of those workshops were held virtually. At the same time, FWC held one-on-one interviews with various stakeholders on Lake Okeechobee. Most recently, FWC sent out and stakeholders completed online surveys. Currently, we are in this phase of the project schedule as depicted by the red box. Inwood and the FWC are currently reviewing all the stakeholder information gathered to date, which will help shape the lake management plan. A first draft of the management plan will be completed by early June. This draft will include some conceptual goals and objectives that consider feedback from the stakeholders and FWC's jurisdictional limits. From there, Inwood and the FWC will hold small focus group meetings to discuss the conceptual goals and objectives and gather additional feedback on the first draft of the lake management plan. A second draft lake management plan will be prepared based on input gathered from those focus group meetings. Another public meeting will be held sometime in the fall to present the information. Because we can hold both in-person and virtual meetings, seasonal residents will be able to participate in the lake management process. The final plan will be completed in the spring of 2022 and presented to the public around the same time period. FWC held 8 stakeholder workshops between July and August of 2020. FWC had planned to hold in-person workshops. However, with COVID, these workshops were conducted virtually with stakeholders. Participation for these workshops was solicited through a questionnaire at in-person public meetings held in February of 2020 in the cities of Okeechobee, Clewiston, and West Palm Beach to announce the management plan, press releases, social media posts, monthly flyers of the Lake Okeechobee Interagency Plant Task Force, and a local email of over 200 stakeholders from the past FWC meetings or communications. Based on the interest received, these workshops were organized into specific user groups to stimulate conversations. They were crappie anglers, commercial fishers, conservation organizations, hunters, bass anglers, nature-based recreation, and mixed-use interests. 39 individuals across these user groups participated in these efforts and provided input to the FWC. Various groups and NGOs represented included local and national fishing organizations like Florida Bass Nation and the American Sport Fishing Association, waterfowl groups such as Waterfowlers of Florida, and local organizations such as the Calusa Waterkeeper, Audubon Society, People's Alliance Supporting Our Obligation to Posterity, Sierra Club, Captains for Clean Water, and the Everglades Foundation. Input varied across multiple management strategies. Many stakeholders from otherwise different groups had similar concerns such as management of non-native fish and wildlife, vegetation loss, poor water quality, and methods of invasive plant management. Some concerns related to management issues are outside of FWC's jurisdiction, such as water quality or lake water levels. Most users expressed an interest in more communication from FWC, including new and unique ways of providing information. Feedback received helped formulate questions that would later be asked in the surveys. Full summaries of workshops and interviews are available on our website for review. Attempts were made to diversify the stakeholders that would be interviewed to ensure all interests were heard. The interviews included partner and cooperating agency staff with the ability to influence management and policy both locally and across the South Florida ecosystem. Examples of cooperating agencies include the South Florida Water Management District, the Florida Department of Environmental Protection, Florida Department of Agriculture and Consumer Services, the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, and various county and local government staff. Additionally, lake-related businesses included tackle shops, fish houses, marinas, and lodging, such as hotels and RV parks. Key takeaways were often identified by multiple stakeholders, which tells us that these issues are important to all users. Full summaries of the stakeholder interviews are also available for review on the Lake Management Plan website. The online survey was a great success with a lot of participation. This tells us that there are many stakeholders with an interest in being involved and having their voices heard as we continue to develop the management plan for the lake. The survey included roughly 30 questions focusing on specific aspects of lake management. Timing of surveys was intended to capture the highest usage on the lake, which is typically in the winter when we had the most utilization both in terms of people and wildlife. Nearly half the respondents identified as a concerned citizen, which further clarifies the diversity of stakeholders. Participation for Lake Okeechobee far exceeded that from the other two systems, the Harris Chain of Lakes and the Kissimmee Chain. The takeaway was that Lake Okeechobee is very important to the South Florida ecosystem and its stakeholders, and that message was loud and clear. The survey results were clear that stakeholders were dissatisfied with the current condition of Lake Okeechobee and FWC's management on the lake, and we at FWC heard you. These results indicate that there is much needed progress to be made in this management plan. We hope that this is another opportunity to do that with you. In measuring the success of FWC's management, the highest preferred measures were the cover of submerged and emergent aquatic vegetation. Other preferred measures included wading bird and sport fish abundance, floating plant coverage, access, and navigation. When offered to write in other options, additional interest included several measures under the authority of our partner agencies, including water quality, nutrient loading, lake levels, and discharges. Communication with our partner agencies regarding these issues is ongoing and will continue throughout this process as well. As we prepare the lake management plans, the FWC will be limited to our jurisdiction, which is the management of fish and wildlife resources. However, we recognize that water quality and water levels are examples of critical factors for the continued successful management of those resources, and we will continue to work together with those partner agencies as we develop the management plans. In terms of specific habitats, the highest stakeholder preferences were for hydrilla, eelgrass, bulrush, cattail, and kissimmee grass. Stakeholders generally had high support for using prescribed fire to manage Lake Okeechobee's marsh. Opinions were mixed when asked about managing dense cattail and torpedo grass with herbicide, prescribed fire, or a combination of herbicide and prescribed fire, with preferences leaning towards fire. Regarding floating plant management, the stakeholders reported mixed opinions related to the ecological impact of floating plants. In terms of coverage, the majority of respondents indicated that the ideal coverage of floating plants is 50% or less, with most respondents wanting between 1 and 25%. The support for the treatment of floating plants with either herbicide or mechanical treatment also grows with the higher coverage of plants. Throughout Florida, hydrilla is managed on a system-by-system basis, and this is a common concern expressed in the surveys. On Lake Okeechobee, lake conditions tend to naturally control hydrilla distribution and cover, and staff acknowledge the ecological benefits of its cover at this rate. Because of its nature on this system, FWC's current policy on Lake Okeechobee is to allow hydrilla to come and go naturally. The majority of stakeholders responding to the survey support or strongly support this policy. Stakeholders were asked a variety of questions specific to the lake's fish and wildlife. Overall, stakeholders had high concern for non-native fish and wildlife on the lake. There was high support for their removal, with large majority of respondents willing to participate in FWC-sponsored removal events. Stakeholders largely supported current fishing regulations, although there were some concerns with the current harvest rates of largemouth bass and black crappie. Preferences for successful fishing also varied, with strong leaning towards large, abundant, and diverse fishery targets, and more broad opinions on the importance of keeping fish for dinner. Finally, the majority of stakeholders were unaware of the current stocking of hybrid striped bass and had mixed support of that program. Stakeholders were also asked location-based questions to highlight spatial use patterns, preferences for mechanical harvesting, and areas of least concern with herbicide use. As shown here, stakeholder preferences and concerns are highly correlated with their use among key areas along the western half of the lake. Just as a reminder, full summaries of all stakeholder workshops, interviews, and surveys are available on the Lake Management Plan website. So that was a lot of information. I'd like to take a moment to go back to the project schedule to remind you of what the FWC has done to date, where we are today, and the next steps in the process. Again, the purpose of this meeting is to provide information to and receive back from you, the stakeholders. The FWC presented the lake management planning process to the public in February of 2020. Between that first public meeting and today, the FWC has conducted stakeholder engagement through a variety of methods and collected a great deal of information. This information is being reviewed and processed in order to prepare conceptual goals and objectives within the lake management plan for Lake Okeechobee. The next steps will be to hold several focus group meetings in June and July with various stakeholders, during which time the FWC will receive feedback from those stakeholders on the conceptual goals and objectives of the first draft management plan and potential refinements that can be incorporated into the second draft of the plan. I mentioned that focus group meetings are planned between June and July of this year. These will be guided discussions with 5 to 12 people per meeting, where the FWC will present the current data and receive feedback from stakeholders on the first draft of the lake management plan, including conceptual goals and objectives. This feedback will then be used to prepare the second draft of the lake management plan. I'm sure you're wondering how you can get involved in this process. Currently, FWC maintains a list of stakeholders that have engaged with us on previous plans, including this lake management plan effort or on similar focus group efforts, such as the black crappie management plan, like in the photo shown on the slide. As part of this process, we will send out an email request to stakeholders on that list to seek their interest in participating in one of these focus group meetings. If you don't know if you're on the distribution list or wish to participate in one of the focus group meetings, please send an email to the contacts on the next slide. For additional information or to be included on the FWC's distribution list for this or future projects, please contact Ryan, Mason, Brendan, or Ben at the information provided on this slide. If you would like to stay informed on the lake management planning process for Lake Okeechobee, please visit the Lake Management Plan website at the link shown on the slide as well. Additionally, you will find a link to provide your comments or questions on this website. As of today, the website has information on the hydrilla treatment plan proposal for Lake Okeechobee, the management plan introduction from 2020, the workshop summary, and the interview results report, all of which can be used in drafting the lake management plan. Copies of the draft management plans and other materials will be posted on the webpage as they become available. This concludes the presentation on the lake management planning effort to date and upcoming next steps. We thank you for your time and attention. At this time, we welcome any comments and questions from the public. Again, if you could provide those in the question box, we will be able to read them aloud and answer them. If you would like to be recognized with your comment or question, please state that so the reader will know to include your name. With that, Amanda, would you mind reading the first question?
Hey, thanks, Jason. No problem. Can you hear me okay?
Yep, I hear you just fine.
Okay, thanks. All right, Alyssa, we're going to have you kick things off. This question is regarding, hold on, let me just get it pulled up here, sorry. Okay, what is the current acreage of SAV, or the submerged aquatic vegetation, in Lake Okeechobee? What is the goal for acreage in Lake Okeechobee?
Hi there. Yes, South Florida Water Management District is the entity that monitors SAV. However, in 2018, we had 5,187 acres. In 2019, we went up to 25,935 acres. And I believe they are still finalizing the 2020 data. This increase was due largely to the low lake levels we had during that time. And the goal is hopefully going to help be determined by this management plan.
Okay, and I've got just a couple more follow-ups to that. This is, okay, similar. What is the plan for planting the submerged aquatic vegetation in Lake Okeechobee? Which I think we've kind of just addressed, but I don't know if you have anything else you want to add to that.
Yeah, so we did have plans to plant some pondweed this past year. However, lake levels became pretty high and we cannot plant in water levels that deep. So it is on hold until the lake comes down again, if it is needed.
Okay, and then one more for you, Alyssa. What is the best lake level that will promote the SAV to grow and increase? Okay, which is, I think you just answered that one as well. But
well, lake levels between 12 and 15 are currently what not only FWC, but South Florida Water Management District biologists, U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, and other entities have put together as a performance measure for recover that we feel is the best for growing SAV. Periodic highs and lows are also helpful, but we want to stay generally in that range.
all right, thank you, Alyssa. Okay, Danielle, I've got a question for you. Okay. It's a statement and a question. So FWC paused spraying for 3 days for public comment and then stated that they would be willing to award $1 million for anyone that can provide a better solution. What is the status?
Yeah, so we did. We issued what's called a request for information to solicit new ideas for managing aquatic plants without the use of herbicide. We received, I think it was around 60 replies. A lot of those were ideas. A lot of them were reviewing existing technology, maybe some modifications to technology. But what we are doing, we've kind of moved on from that. We are currently exploring a nutrient reduction project that we're partnering with DEP. They're funding the work and we're partnering with DEP and the Corps, and we're going to look at doing that nutrient reduction project with some novel technology on Lake Okeechobee.
All right, thank you. Okay, Mason, Water level and subsequent quality is the single catalyst for submerged grass growth or destruction. How can FWC be effective if it has little control over this powerful variable?
Sure. As Alyssa mentioned too a little bit ago, with the stage performance measures and in our agency policy of around 12 to 15 feet, I think the key there about being effective is the partnership that we're going to continue with agencies. We fully recognize that things like water quality are outside of FWC's specific jurisdiction, but fully recognize how important it is. And so even though it's outside of our jurisdiction, this management plan is going to have, we anticipate being able to include in our management plan cooperative language and supportive statements that we can continue working with our partner agencies, like Florida Department of Environmental Protection, for example, on the water quality side. And on the lake stage side, we work closely with the South Florida Water Management District, Army Corps of Engineers, and that's always going to be something we continue to do. And being able to incorporate it in this management plan, we are working closely with stakeholders as well as those partner agencies as well.
All right, thank you, Mason. We've got a lot of questions coming in, questions and comments. We are going to try to get to all of them tonight. So just give me 1 second here. Okay, Danielle, what happens to the beneficial grasses down current from where you spray?
Hi, yes. So when FWC uses a herbicide, we use herbicides that are registered by the EPA and the Florida Department of Agriculture and Consumer Services. And once a herbicide is registered, FWC doesn't just begin using the herbicide. We do a lot of research, fund a lot of research to make sure we understand how that herbicide is going to work with our uses. So we understand the selectivity when we're using that herbicide and how long it will stay in the water and that kind of stuff. So we don't expect it to have any impacts for floating plant management for plants downstream. When we're doing hydrilla control, which we do not manage hydrilla extensively on Lake Okeechobee, we also do a lot of water sampling behind ourselves so that we know where that herbicide is moving.
All right, thank you. Okay, Brendan, who monitors water quality, wildlife, and fish abundance in areas before and after spraying?
So that would be me, at least observationally. We do have, our fisheries folks going out there doing their surveys around the whole lake, but pre, post, and during surveys, I would be the person out there surveying either by helicopter once a month or multiple times a week by airboat, checking on their work, as well as observing the area that they're working in.
All right, and Brendan, while I've got you, I've actually have another question for you as well. Okay, recognizing how important plant growth is to the lake, how responsive is or has been the Corps and other, oh, sorry, every time somebody enters a question, it moves my sentence. The Corps and others in working with you and the stakeholders on truly managing the levels as critical time or seasons.
So as kind of Alyssa had mentioned earlier, the district does these SAB surveys around the lake. We have meetings between all the different biologists from different agencies, whether it be South Florida Water Management District, the Corps, FWC. We have meetings for an aquatic plant management interagency team that we all meet. I think it's about once a quarter when we go over different projects on the lake, but we all work very intimately on the lake The Corps does manage a certain portion of the lake, so we work very closely with them, updating our schedule, so make sure that all of the Corps' work is outlined on the public schedule, just like our work is for the lake, so that everybody can see that. So everybody does work very closely on the lake, which is really nice.
Okay. And this question is from Mr. John Monty, and this is for you again, Brendan. Do we know how many acres of invasive floating plants were mechanically harvested last year?
Yes. So in the fiscal year 2019-2020, we harvested about 372 acres of floating plants. And then this current fiscal year, 2020 to 2021, we harvested about 21 acres. We were harvesting at the earlier part of this year, but with a lot of the COVID-related budget cuts and operational things like that, we ceased operations. But kind of like how Danielle said, we're looking at these nutrient reduction projects, which mechanically manage plants in ways like that. So still working it in.
All right, thank you. Mason, how can an airboat or helicopter determine the health of the fish in the treated areas? Seems there should be shock boats or something else to survey biological effects to the fish and other animals.
Yes, so we don't do electrofishing, reference the shocking there, pre and post every single treatment. But what we do is we do a lot more long-term monitoring. We monitor both sport fish. We have specific sport fish monitoring programs for things like largemouth bass and crappie. We also do more community monitoring where we're looking at everything from bass down to mosquito fish and looking at more community health metrics. And so we kind of look at that more on a broad scale, long-term picture, because we really want to get those long-term trends. And so that's really the majority of our monitoring. But kind of the essence of that question there would be more so something that would be a dedicated research experiment as opposed to our more long-term monitoring. But all of our long-term monitoring data is fully public information. If anybody'd like to access it, please let me know. Be very happy to share it. And we try to get that information out as much as we can.
All right, thanks, Mason. Okay, Danielle, have you ever tested the muck that is created after organic material breaks down?
Yes, so we've heard some concerns that when we've managed invasive aquatic plants that there may be herbicides building up in the muck. Stakeholders have expressed that concern to us. So we have funded research. We worked with the University of Florida and they worked with stakeholders. This research was conducted on Lake Istapoga and they took sediment samples and sent those sediments off to have them analyzed to see if any of the herbicides that we were using on Lake Istapoga could be detected in the organic material, and there was no herbicides detected from our activities.
Okay, thank you. Ryan, we have a question for you. How can water quality not be within the jurisdiction of FWC? Can someone explain? Water quality has everything to do with the quality of the fish and other sea life, as well as wildlife that drink from the lake. Herbicide spraying is negatively impacting our fish and wildlife.
Yes, so FWC's jurisdiction is to manage the fish, wildlife, and habitats and the people's use of those wildlife resources. Definitely water level, water quality is very crucial to fish and wildlife resources. But within the state of Florida, those jurisdictions are aligned with water management districts and Department of Environmental Protection to oversee those items. So following, what our legislatures give us as far as responsibilities. That's how things are divvied up within the state of Florida.
All right, and Ryan, while I still have you here, will the lake management plan include a component for managing, maintaining, improving lake bottom substrate materials? For example, siltation due to sprayed decaying plants and in-lake movement of existing mucky soils due to winds and waves has caused naturally sand bottom areas with low turbidity to be negatively impacted. Will the plan address these problems?
Yes, within our plan, we definitely want to address habitat management techniques that it can include sediment removal, harvesting, things like that that are going to have an impact on the sediment. You know, I think in a very large sense, we'd love to be able to address the overall lake sediment issue, recognizing that it's a really big and difficult issue to address. And you know, we're looking for novel solutions to try to address that in this plan within our jurisdictions, but also with cooperation, coordination with other state and federal agencies.
All right, thank you. Okay, Danielle, has anyone studied the decline in population of pollinators, bats, and other beneficial life near water bodies where herbicides are sprayed?
Sorry, couldn't get my mute button off. Yes, so I think I mentioned this a little bit before. Before a herbicide can be used in Florida's aquatic environment, it has to be registered first with the Environmental Protection Agency and then with the Florida Department of Agriculture and Consumer Services. And as part of that registration process, the EPA requires over 150 tests and ecological risk assessments to ensure that that there will be no adverse impacts when this product is used according to the label. And just to give some context, the EPA has over 300 herbicides registered for use, but in the state of Florida, we can only use 17 herbicides in the aquatic environment, but they have been rigorously tested through that registration process.
All right, thank you, Danielle. Okay, and we do have a follow-up question for Mason. We have a lot of questions and comments coming in, which is great, and we really appreciate everyone entering in and participating. I am trying to find the follow-up question. Okay, well, I will get back to that one. And this is a question for Brendan by John Monty. How much hydrilla is currently on the lake now?
So I don't think that we have an actual acreage estimate yet because we're waiting on, usually we can get some of that data pieced out from the Water Management District's SAB survey around the lake. From what I've seen out there, the majority of the hydrilla in the lake is out near Harney Pond. We do have quite a bit of hydrilla that's kind of sporadically sprinkled in pretty much from Harney Pond all the way up to Kings Bar. The whole ridge of the marsh, the whole edge of the marsh there has a lot of eelgrass and a lot of some spots of pondweed, and along with the hydrilla mixed in there. But it's mostly in that kind of northwestern marsh area on the lake, just anecdotally at least.
Okay, thank you. And Baron, what factors contribute to the economic importance of the fishery to the surrounding communities?
I mean, virtually anything. Anytime someone's in the area because they're fishing, they're contributing to the economy of the area. And that, so that starts with simple things like bait and tackle, ice, fuel for boats, fuels for cars to get to the area. If someone's staying overnight, they're purchasing meals. They're staying in hotels or at the various RV parks in the area, guide fees get paid. All these things are supporting jobs in the area and lead to, you know, the various numbers that we point to about how much freshwater fishing contributes to our local economies. You know, it's freshwater fishing is big business in Florida. Thanks.
All right, Mason, and if you are ready, I do have a follow-up from your last question. Given the response, it seems that you don't examine the local effects, correct?
Right. So I should clarify that there are quite a few sources of information out there. A lot of research has been done on this topic, and several different universities, and we do have some information that has been done testing different types of treatments on fish. Do fish move off of bedding sites during treatments? What happens, you know, during different types of treatments? But I did want to mention as well, this is a major interest of ours, and we are doing our research arm, the Fish and Wildlife Research Institute, FWRI, is doing some work on this topic moving forward using some cage studies. This is going to be up in the potentially up in the Harris Chain of Lakes, but this is some ongoing research that we're doing to get stakeholders involved in the research. Use some cage studies to measure these effects, what effects may be before, during, after any sort of treatments. They're going to be looking at, is there mortality, abnormalities, all of these types of things that we've been hearing stakeholder concerns about. We are trying to address these issues in studies like this. So these are things that we are actively investigating at the moment through our research arm at FWRI.
All right, thank you, Mason. Ryan, what agency is responsible for water quality and nutrient loading?
That agency responsible is Department of Environmental Protection.
All right, thank you. And then Mason, I'll jump back to you for a second here. Have you tested the fish to see if they have herbicide in them?
That, I believe, has not been successfully accomplished. From my understanding, this may be better answered by Ryan or Danielle, but my understanding is that that is a lot more complicated, and there are not even research labs available potentially for doing certain types of work like this. Most of the work that is done, we do pretty heavy work on things, cooperating with Department of Health on things like mercury advisories and things like that.
Ryan, did you want to add any? Okay, thanks.
Yes, please. So, you know, the question of, have fish been tested for herbicide accumulation in their tissue? You know, back a year and a half ago, as we were getting messages about stakeholders noticing from their perspective, you know, uptick in abnormalities in fish that could be, you know, lesions, tumors, you know, things like that. Our agency set upon monitoring that in a coordinated effort, you know, as part of our long-term monitoring program, where some of the important things that we want to know is, what is that trend in abnormalities? Now, when you go to process the histology of fish, that's where it gets complicated, in that the majority of the abnormalities people are seeing are often bacterial infections, fungal infections, dermal abrasion, things like that. We are actively collecting that long-term monitoring data to be able to tell from a scientific perspective, you know, is this these abnormalities that people are seeing trending upwards, static, going down? Because it's not an uncommon thing to have to see a fish with, you know, some level of abnormality. Now, as far as herbicide accumulation, going back to some of the stuff that Danielle mentioned earlier about the registration process, the fact that the herbicides that we use are registered for aquatic systems, to be able to be registered for an aquatic system, those herbicides would need to not accumulate in tissue. Given that fact, there, you know, we looked at the possibility of collecting some of these fish that people are seeing and trying to test for any kind of herbicides, and we were unsuccessful in finding labs that were able to run any tests or that were tests available. So, and that's why we don't have that. Can't say, well, here's that information.
All right, thank you, Ryan. I have a comment from Pete. I'm going to call you Pete Q so that I don't say your last name wrong. He's asked that I read this out loud. I would like to thank the Commission for their continued effort and diligence in seeking out and implementing new technologies to reduce the need for chemical spraying while removing nutrients from the lake and restoring them to the landscape. Keep up the great work, and I look forward to the future successes of the invasive plant management team. Oh, it was from Mike. I'm sorry, not Pete. Okay. Thank you, Mike. Okay. Let's see. Danielle, I have one for you. It is a little longer, so let me see if I can break it up into multiple questions here. Herbicide spraying releases sequestered nutrients and carbon, delivering them to the lake sediments. The Okeechobee Basin is already burdened by 100,000 metric tons of available phosphorus known as legacy phosphorus. The use of herbicides exacerbates this issue while harvesting, processing, recovery would help in the efforts to meet TMDL requirements. FWC has done mechanical harvesting, but do not seem to have the political will to assist in developing programs and encouraging the private sector to develop needed innovative methods. I always hear of how high the cost is with mechanical harvesting, but certainly if the private and public sectors work together, the cost will come down. Okay, sorry, I guess there was not a question in there, but Danielle, I don't know if you want to comment on any of that.
Yeah, I'll just, we have increased our harvesting efforts on Lake Okeechobee within the past several years. We harvested in fiscal year 1920, 372 acres of floating plants. This fiscal year, we've harvested 21 acres of floating plants for, and combined total, we've spent around $651,000 harvesting floating plants on Lake Okeechobee. You know, some of the issues we've, you know, had with harvesting on Lake Okeechobee is finding disposal that's close enough. It makes it extremely expensive when you have to transport plants at a far distance, and a lake like the size of Okeechobee, finding disposal anywhere near where you're harvesting can be very difficult, but we have increased our efforts. We're also, again, we're looking, partnering with DEP and the Corps on a nutrient reduction project that's going to take place on Lake Okeechobee, hopefully here within the next couple months. So we are still looking for ways that we can increase our harvesting and increase innovative methods, but yes, you know, hopefully that provides at least some kind of insight into what we've been doing this past year.
All right, thanks, Danielle. Alyssa, which native plants do you find most important for the native apple snails that are important for the snail kites, and how well are they being preserved?
So the native apple snails are found on a variety of plants within Okeechobee. However, the native apple snail population is very low at the moment. The exotic apple snails are what you predominantly do find in Okeechobee, and they are happy on most types of plants. And the exotic apple snail is what snail kites are currently eating and surviving off of and doing very well off of. And hope that answers that question.
All right, thank you. Okay. Okay, give me 1 second, sorry. Okay, and we have comments coming in from J. Scott Wilson. And this is just a comment I'm going to read out loud. So I have fished Florida 55 years. I've caught over a dozen personally and collected 600 of the worst open festering sores. I've seen worm lesions and spawn damaged fish my entire life. Me or no one I know has ever seen these horrific abnormalities. Okay. Okay, Ryan, I think we can all agree the lake needs a master plan that guides lake levels, grasses, fish, and wildlife populations. Given the economic impact and the potential for Lake Okeechobee to be a world-class destination, will this plan deliver these qualities?
Yeah, I think that is definitely our goal. But I think we have to also recognize that Lake Okeechobee in South Florida ecosystem, there's a lot of big issues going on that, not only FWC, but the other state and federal agencies that are working on this system, the stakeholders, we all have to do our part. And, with this plan, we hope to focus in our efforts in terms of fish, wildlife, and habitat management with the planning efforts that others that are involved on, like LOSM, that are looking to manage water levels and such like that. We're involved there in trying to influence that as well. And other folks on this in this group can speak much better to some of those local efforts and partnerships planning with state and federal agencies.
All right, thank you. Danielle, what is being done to combat nutrient loading? Did I already ask you this one? Did we go over this?
Yeah, I will just add, I think we talked about some of the agencies that's responsible for water quality, and I've mentioned the nutrient reduction project that we're partnering with several times. So I think that's what we're actively doing.
Okay, and I have another follow-up for you, Danielle. Herbicides have been scientifically proven to stimulate algae and cyanobacteria growth when trapped in runoff as a pollutant moving through watersheds. Why is herbicide application considered a scientifically valid management action when it drastically exacerbates the negative impacts of eutrophication and removes the filtration system of severely impaired water bodies, which ultimately discharge into and damage estuarine and marine ecosystems?
So one of the things, water hyacinths, they're growing in these nutrient-rich waters, and as they're growing, they're recycling nutrients. So as the plant grows, it sheds leaves, grows new leaves, sheds leaves, so it's recycling nutrients. One of the things that we do to, reduce our impacts is what we call maintenance control. We want to manage these plants when the populations are very small, as opposed to letting these plants grow into large mats where we then have to spray them. We want to manage these plants while they're small patches so we can reduce those impacts.
Okay, and while I've got you, I'll just I'll keep you in the hot seat, Danielle. How can you be in charge of chemical but not in charge of quality you know where the chemical is and when it leaves the water. The monitoring is testing of water. The monitoring is testing of water muck done. If so, can we get test results?
Okay. So I'm not sure I heard the question there. I think the question is, can we get those test results from the Lake Istapoga study? And I think we can. We're going to get information out after this meeting, and so we can certainly attach that study to the information that we send out.
Okay, thank you. Okay, Ryan, is there a projected % increase in use of herbicides or potential % decrease with the new management plan?
So with the management plan for Lake Okeechobee, you know, we are currently in the drafting stages. You know, we are looking at a lot of different ways to define success within these plans, whether it be, you know, coverage of a particular plant species, X amount of catch per unit effort of our fisheries monitoring, or even targets like, you know, increase harvesting by X amount or things like that. So right now we're still putting together the drafts of those plans based on the input we've received so far. And then stakeholders will have a opportunity to really have in-depth discussions on what is in those drafts, how we can tweak and improve them going forward.
All right, Ryan. Mr. Wilson wants to know, when did Ryan and Mason first see Big O?
So I think that one is related to work experience, in that, you know, my experience, I've been with the agency for 13 years. Mason, a similar amount of time. I think Mason has been in his current position for 2 years, but working for multiple years in the South Florida ecosystem. But, you know, collectively, with the organizers here on this meeting, we have over 40 years work experience working with Lake Okeechobee. And that experience extends well beyond just the folks engaged in this room. You know, we have biologists who have over 35 years experience working on the lake individually, and multiple folks with that sort of history, from expertise in habitat management, plant management, fisheries management, even non-game species management. So I wanted to speak to that level of experience that we have working on these plans within FWC.
All right. And Mason, I have a follow-up for you. Who do we send evidence to of the abnormalities in our fish? There's a lot of evidence out there. Tumors, melting fins, open sores on the fish from our lakes that are sprayed with herbicides.
Yeah, great question. That we have fish kill hotline is the easiest method to start out with. Our fish kill hotline is very easy. It's a phone number, or can be submitted online, or even better, we have a FWC reporter app. That's something that if you're out on the water and you see fish kill abnormality, you can submit it. We get information, we get coordinates right there. If your phone is connected and you allow the program to give us that location, that fish kill hotline and fish kill database is really important to us, because that allows us to collectively look at everything across the whole state. We have all this information. You guys are eyes and ears out there, and it really helps us when you can provide anything that you're seeing. Again, fish kills, abnormalities, anything strange, all that information can go together in the same database and can be used to help us with monitoring and other types of research. One step further for this, you know, specifically to abnormalities and lesions as well, if it is something that is very current and fresh, like if you have it in your possession very recently, I know that our fish health lab in St. Petersburg is often willing to even get that specimen to them for free. So when you call them, say if you call them at the fish kill hotline and you have a specimen and that they're interested in, they will provide shipping labels and get that, because that's some of the best information they can get is when they have a specimen in front of them a lot of the times. But fish kill hotline is the way to go. We can certainly send that out in follow-up information. Thank you.
All right, great. Thanks, Mason. We are just over an hour into our meeting tonight. We're getting a lot of questions and comments. We're going to try to get to all of them, but if we are unable to get to all of the questions or comments by 8, remember we will be posting a Q&A that takes place, so we'll answer any of the questions or comments that we missed. And then if there is any follow-up that's needed, feel free to reach out to the team, or we can reach out to you to address any additional questions that you may have, or that maybe you asked that weren't relevant to the meeting tonight, but we still want to connect with you. So we will be doing that. All right, Danielle, what was the result of the moratorium on the use of herbicide maintenance on Lake Okeechobee in the 1980s?
Yes, so we did have a moratorium back in the 1980s on the use of herbicides to treat floating plants. During that period, we used mechanical harvesting to manage floating plants. The harvesters we had could not keep up with the growth rate of the plants. So eventually we did have to continue managing with herbicides. We saw an explosion in those plants. I believe it went from 2,000 to 8,000 acres in a very short period of time, actually during the winter time. And so really the result was we had to spend a lot more money. We had to use helicopters to get plants under control. And of course that, when you get out of maintenance control, that means you end up using more herbicide. So that's one of the primary reasons when we're managing plants, is that we want to keep these plants at low levels. We want to routinely manage them so that we can minimize the cost to manage them, minimize the herbicide we have to use, and of course minimize the impacts from the treatments.
All right, thanks, Danielle. Brendan, how many acres have you sprayed, or did you spray in 2020, and how much money was spent?
So so far this fiscal year, we've managed about 5,250 acres, and we've spent about 690,000, a little over that, which is actually, this fiscal year isn't currently over, but from last fiscal year, we've actually treated, and we're on track to treat a lot less acreage than we did last year by getting that lake much closer to maintenance control levels. In fiscal year 19 to 20, we actually treated about 9,800 acres for a cost of about $1.3 million. So another example of how trying to get the lake reduced down to maintenance control levels really does help us use much less herbicide and treat much less acreage of plants.
All right, Baron, do you find that the preferences of recreational users of the lake are taken into account by the district and Army Corps when compared to other needs such as flood control and water storage? How will the lake management plan balance the needs of recreationalists compared to other uses more effectively?
Okay, as far as the district and the Corps, including multiple users, multiple project purposes in their management, absolutely. The Central and South Florida project is congressionally authorized, and that dictates that fish and wildlife, recreation, navigation, human health and safety, a whole host of project purposes are authorized under that. And that's the federal legislation that dictates much of the Corps' management. Is in fact the legislation under which the LOSM, the Lake Okeechobee Systems Operation Manual, is being revised right now. And one of FWC's goals through our management plan process here has been to keep our management plan that we are currently crafting synchronized and well connected to the LOSM process, because LOSM does some things the FWC doesn't have authority over. So we can help meld the two processes to benefit the lake and its users, the fish and wildlife habitat going forward. So yes, those things are included, and we have to work at continuing to balance them and include them all.
All right, thanks, Baron. And I have just a couple more for you. For right now, what programs does the state plan to initiate in order to combat the river of nutrients coming into the lake? As with Chesapeake Bay, the solution is to educate and enforce the change in potassium and nitrogen usage. Is there any legislation pending to accelerate this movement? Baron, do you know, is there any legislation pending to accelerate this movement?
I'm not up on all legislation. I'm sorry, I got a little lost in that question, but I mean, there's a lot going on with the lake. Losom's a really big deal, and that combined with our management plan is a good place for people to focus their efforts to help manage fish and wildlife resources and habitats on Lake Okeechobee.
All right, Alyssa, other than management of non-native plants, what are some of the management tools the FWC can use to achieve lake management objectives?
So one big tool that they may have mentioned earlier is prescribed fire. In fact, we did one today. We burned about 600 to 700 acres, even with the high lake levels. We also are starting to utilize other methods such as disking in the inner marsh, where there's torpedo grass, and we're looking at trying to incorporate shredding in certain areas where we have organic berm built up, trying to keep that from blocking a lot of the flow of water from the between the marsh and the open water. And as mentioned, we have the harvesters that we can use on occasion. And that's mostly what I'm thinking of on the top of my head. So, but we do try and use other tools when we can. We do try to do planting when needed, when we think it will be successful. And that's it, I think, right now.
All right, thanks, Alyssa. Mark, what is being done to improve duck habitat?
So this is actually a good follow-up to what Alyssa just had to say. One of the big things is those prescribed fires. Back in 2015, I believe it was, they had a large fire in Moonshine Bay. That area is still one of the best areas to duck hunt on the lake. The habitat came back great. On top of that, the torpedo grass herbicide treatments in the Indian Prairie Intermarsh area will definitely be beneficial for ducks. Torpedo grass is an exotic plant that takes over those shallow water areas. And then lastly, it's just going to be the recovery of submerged plants. As all duck hunters know, ringneck ducks especially are attracted to hydrilla, but also eelgrass and pondweed. So as those submerged plants recover, we'll see more duck use.
All right, thanks, Mark. Danielle, I'm sure you are aware of the Chinese efforts to cultivate water hyacinths on their reservoirs to control cyanobacteria. Have you been able to review their efforts?
No, I'm not sure which study they're referring to.
Okay. And Danielle, I don't have the previous reference for this. So the question is, how long after spraying herbicides was sediment tested?
Well, for Lake Istapoga, management activities are ongoing almost weekly. So, I would say immediately, but the areas that we tested sediments were areas that historically grew hydrilla, but they were located around the entire lake, and we tested not only the herbicides that we use for hydrilla, but also all the herbicides that we've used for floating and emergent vegetation.
All right, and Alyssa, how will FWC address contaminated muck?
So periodically when the lake gets very low, as in drought level low, we will bring in mechanical equipment, such as dump trucks, excavators, and we will haul out muck. We do test this muck prior to removal, and we've actually found no contamination in the muck that we have removed. This is mostly muck that is formed within the lake, so it's not the deep water muck. So we've not removed that, but so we've tested for contaminants, including arsenic, and we have not found any levels there. It's actually available for farmland, and we have used it in some crop areas before.
Okay, thank you. Danielle, we might have covered this one, but what area does the plan cover? Just the lake, or does it include surrounding bodies of water such as the Kissimmee River that input to the lake?
This lake management plan is focusing on Lake Okeechobee, but we have other lake management plans that we're working on as well. That includes the Kissimmee chain of lakes, and then we're also working on the Harris chain of lakes. So I think the Kissimmee chain of lakes plan doesn't include the river, just the chain of lakes north of Kissimmee.
All right. Alyssa, how would you characterize the state of the lake at this time? How close is it to where you would like to see it from the FWC perspective? That is, where does it stand with things you actually have direct control over?
So since Hurricane Irma and since the high water levels that we had associated with that, we have seen some recovery in fish populations, snail kite populations, SAV throughout the lake, which is very encouraging to see that the low lake levels we've had for the past couple of years have increased these populations. However, we do acknowledge that we have a far way to go, and we could be set back by high lake levels or hurricanes in the future. So while the lake level itself is outside of our jurisdiction, we do provide input to these interagency meetings, saying that we do prefer the lake to be between 12 and 15. And when we have been high for a long period of time, we encourage that we need to get low for a period of time. And we believe that's what's helped some of this recovery the past couple of years.
Okay, Ryan, given that aquatic herbicides are tested on fish during the registration process, is there a need to test fish after spraying?
I'm assuming that's for accumulation in tissue. And I would say at this time, no, because we don't have the tests available to run, or the labs available that have tests to run on fish to say, you know, this is accumulated in the fish. I think what is important is the trend information. You know, are we seeing an increase in abnormalities, or is it static? Lots of things could be triggering that, whether it be water quality, cyanobacteria in the water, different things like that that are, you know, really tied to water quality.
Yeah, and I'll add to that, as you know, as part of the registration process with the EPA, they've completed those tests. There is no expectation that herbicides would build up in fish tissues, and that's why it's very difficult to find a lab, because there's no market for that, because that's all been thoroughly reviewed as part of the registration process.
All right, Danielle. When will harvesting all of the lakes? The material can be reused. What has to be done to fund a way to transport? I have a funding source in mind. When will you
Can you?
harvest all of the? I'm sorry.
I'm not hearing the question. I'm sorry.
when it says when will harvesting all of the lakes? When will you be done harvesting all of the lakes? When will you stop harvesting all of the lakes? The material can be reused. What has to be done to fund a way to transport?
Yeah, I guess, currently, harvesting is not only limited by funding. Harvesting is limited by several other things as far as floating plants. Many times these floating plants grow in and amongst native plants in very shallow water where harvesters can't reach. FWC does a lot of harvesting. We've always focused our harvesting efforts on things like tussocks, where we have an opportunity to get a lot of organics out of the lake. So it's not simply a funding issue, but certainly harvesting can be more expensive than treating with herbicides. So I think maybe that's where the question is when can we transition to harvesting only? And right now we currently don't have those tools that would allow us to manage these extremely aggressive, fast-growing plants.
Okay, thank you. Brendan, what is maintenance control and how does that compare to only spraying certain times of year?
Sure. So maintenance control is a management ethos that's really intended to manage the lake for floating plants at the lowest feasible levels. And essentially what that is kind of managing the lake or managing really any water body with that boom and bust system of letting things grow out of control until there is issues and then going in and managing them is much more expensive. You use much more herbicide and you really do drop much more organics onto the bottom. Keeping the lake in maintenance, it prevents issues from happening. When the lake level, or when the floating plant levels on the lake are up near 2 or almost 3,000 acres, like it has been at times the last 2 years, we see with just this, the shifts of the wind, we'll see several boat ramps be blocked with up to sometimes like hundreds of acres of floating plants, which, for the north end of the lake, we had a situation like that where several hundred acres of water lettuce had kind of blocked a boat ramp up there, and it took us several months to get that cleared. So really keeping the lake in maintenance, it's not only good for situations like that, but other invasive species that are in the lake. But being in maintenance control, we have the ability to kind of use the contractors to go after some species that are starting to get a foothold in the lake that are just as damaging as floating plants. They just don't have as big of a foothold. So by being in maintenance control, we have the ability to go after those plants as well, that we have approval to go after and things like that. So it's a lot of different ways that maintenance control really helps us keep the lake healthy.
All right, thank you. Ryan, who is in charge of the roadway network retention areas? Would this be FDOT?
That one I'm not sure of, but we can definitely make note of it, follow up with FDOT and include that in our notes that we send back out to the meeting participants.
Okay, thank you. All right, Brendan, a question for you. Why are you harvesting shallow, non-navigable waters? Tongue twister.
So floating plants are just a tricky species to manage in general because they can be in one location one day and then the winds will take them to a completely different area of the lake. So those shallow water areas in the lake tend to be the only areas, or tend to be most frequently areas to really see big buildups of floating plants. Because they're floating on the surface, if the water bulges, things like that, they'll go up and over native plants, they'll smother them, they'll smother SAV beds, things like that. So they're very difficult to manage in that sense, and when it comes to harvesters, because you really want them in 3+ foot of water to be able to really get those big mats harvested. You really want all of those floating plants to be as close as possible to a disposal site. The transportation time, getting a full load on the harvester and moving it back really is the biggest impediment to the speed of management. So just really trying to find the middle ground of finding a place deep enough that actually does have plants that might stay there, so long as the winds cooperate, and that is a good manageable distance away from a disposal site. So it's difficult. as to why they managing them in the non-navigatable waters is kind of what we have to do, is because that tends to be where the biggest accumulations build up. And then if the wind shifts, all those plants will come out of the shallows and go right into a boat ramp or into the rim canal, things like that.
All right, thank you. Danielle, are the chemicals you spray okay to consume? As in, is it okay, is it safe for humans to eat the fish out of the lake? Or if not, what makes it safe for native animals and fish to live in it?
So it's about how much herbicide we're using. Certainly any herbicide in concentration, that's why our applicators wear gloves and protective equipment. But we're using herbicides that are diluted considerably in water in tank. And so if you use, we're using, sometimes 4 ounces to the acre. So using the herbicides as directed by the label, they are safe to be used in the environment. Again, these are, rigorously tested by the Environmental Protection Agency and the Florida Department of Agriculture and Consumer Services. But it's about the levels that we're using it at, the rates that we're using it at.
All right, thank you. Ryan, who does one contact to implement new ideas to improve the quality of water and improve turbidity on the Okeechobee and Kissimmee waterways?
So, I would say involvement with the LOSM process, the folks that are managing the waters, but also, I think it's okay to, if someone doesn't know who to contact, reach out to our local biologists like Mason or Alyssa, and they can put you on the right path.
All right, Brendan, how can you spray and not kill native plants?
So the herbicides that we use, they have only, in certain cases, it depends on what you're using, have very temporary effects on natives. When it comes to things like spatterdock, say, if you want to treat floating plants that are in a patch of spatterdock, you use a product like, say, Dicquat, it will kill the water hyacinth and it will defoliate the leaves that are there on the spatterdock, but within a couple weeks, all of those leaves are back. It doesn't affect the actual health of the plant. And in a lot of circumstances, we do change up the herbicides based on what situation the plants are found in. If they're found around cattail, we use one product. If they're found around bulrush, we use another. So we really do use the different herbicides that are at our disposal to really use them as effectively as possible when it comes to trying not to damage non-natives.
Okay, thank you. Danielle, can you address bycatch when using harvesters?
Yeah, I think when they're referring to bycatch, harvesters, they go in and they scoop up aquatic plants, and there may be fish in those plants. But we've done some research. We partnered with the Corps this past year to look at bycatch, and there may be some bycatch. We found low bycatch with the Corps project, but the scale that we're using harvesters, we're not really concerned at having any kind of, large impact. So yes, there can be some bycatch, but it shouldn't have any significant impact on any of the fish populations.
All right, thank you. Mason, we have a comment question. It's known that marine mammals such as manatees can't fight off organophosphate poisoning. We are seeing a rapid die-off due to starvation. Has FWC ever tested dead manatees for organophosphate poisoning?
Sure. We have a manatee program that looks at very closely at manatee stresses and mortality events, and I'm not sure aware of any particular cases, as specific as organophosphates. We'd have to reach out to them and clarify that with them. But we do have a very they do maintain a very well-maintained database of all those mortality incidences, and that will include Lake Okeechobee and all of the structures around the lake. And so we can send that out in our follow-up as well.
Okay, and we have just a general comment I'll read. I feel like most of the improvement projects being done on this lake focuses mostly on the inner marshes and spoil islands. There are many areas of the lake that could be opened up to get more current flow. For example, the new area north of Dice Ditch, that project was a huge success. I would like to see more money in projects like this, burning and scraping in the main lake instead of only spraying, and not so many projects to the inner marsh. Also, no vegetation has grown back on the North Shore. This is a huge concern. I have never heard of or seen submergent vegetation not grow back in this area for so long. I really believe the buildup of muck and chemicals has caused this to happen. Okay, Danielle, if water bodies are under maintenance control for floating aquatic vegetation, does this allow FWC to focus on other newer invasive species such as early detection rapid response species?
Yes, so when we have water bodies under maintenance control, we have contractors out looking for very small population of plants, and as opposed to having to, send more contractors out treating larger areas, that allows us to focus on new infestations. That's called, what we say our EDRR species, our early detection and rapid response. FWC doesn't manage all non-native plants. We only manage our most problematic species, which is water hyacinths, but we also focus our management efforts on managing new invaders so that we don't end up with the problems like we have with water hyacinths. So yes, that will, keeping floating plants under maintenance control will absolutely allow our biologists to survey and look for those EDR species and develop treatment plans for those so that we don't, end up with a bigger problem in the future.
All right, and Danielle, how many lakes does FWC manage? Who manages creeks, rivers, etc.?
So FWC has around 450 lakes and rivers in our program. We have criteria, has to have a public boat ramp, has to be a sovereign water body to be in FWC's management program. But currently statewide, we have around 450 public water bodies that we manage.
Okay, Danielle, sorry, don't mean to pick on you. It's stated by the manufacturer that these chemicals are not to be sprayed in windy conditions or pre-rainstorms, but it has been documented that spray boats apply in heavy wind. Why is that?
So again, our contract, the label is the law. There are some herbicides that have wind restrictions. Some herbicides, our contractors, we expect them to follow the label. Not all herbicides have wind restrictions. Certainly, if there's ever a concern with, what our stakeholders are seeing, we want you to contact us. We will certainly do an investigation. We also have what we now call a fleet tracker system where all of our contractors on Lake Okeechobee are being monitored in near real time. So if there are any, issues with their activities, we have a tracking system where we can see where they have been on the lake, at what time, when they're applying herbicide. So we've increased our oversight, but certainly if there's ever any concern, we want to know about it. You can contact us. But again, not all herbicides have wind restrictions on their label.
Sorry, I was muted. Mason, what are the recent trends in fish populations based on FWC surveys and/or based on angler success?
Sure. The two big methods mentioned there, the surveys and angler success. I'll answer that with sport fish abundance off the top of my head, and if there's a follow-up, we can go there. But with the two big fisheries of largemouth bass and black crappie, looking at both our dedicated monitoring, our directed fisheries independent monitoring like electrofishing, and angler catch rates, which we measure through an angler creel survey throughout the year. Largemouth bass has been fluctuating ever since, really through time with fluctuating levels of submerged grasses and habitat conditions. However, right now we're kind of seeing the a stable level. With what I can say is it's certainly not as high as it was, say, in that time period of 2011 to 2014. That's recently when we had a lot of really good conditions on the lake, a lot of good recruitment, spawning, fish conditions were good for bass. And right now we're certainly lower than that time period in recent history, but we're stable and improving. So our electrofishing monitoring has been declining through time in the past few years until it's reached sort of a stable moment in time. And our catch rates follow a similar pattern, but that stability is starting to appears to be starting to take a turn, and that's hopefully going to continue with our improvement in submerged vegetation and other lake conditions as we go forward. For crappie are very well known to be very cyclical in nature. They vary a lot of ups and downs. It's sort of a boom and bust thing over time. But they took their biggest hit after the 2004-2005 hurricane time period, which we suspect a lot of issues with spawning habitat, turbidity issues related to a whole suite of conditions across the lake. They really use the whole lake across their lifespan, but they have recovered since that low point after that 2004-2005 time period, and they've reached more or less what we would consider stable over the past several years, and conditions are improving with them as well. We follow recruitment over time, follow age classes, and this year we saw a age class we had been following for a few years that entered the fishery from a good spawn. So we started to see good angler catch successes this year as those fish got old enough to enter the fishery as they got over 10 inches.
All right, thank you, Mason. Okay, Brendan, can you elaborate on the specific of the nutrient reduction projects? What are the technical practices that are being explored?
So essentially what they're going to be practicing is mechanically removing the plants from around the Indian Prairie Canal. They have a process to be able to shred the plants and get them moved several miles to a local rancher's land where they'll be able to dispose the material there to be able to remove the plants and get them on the other side of the dike, which will be a good way to actually remove the plants out of the watershed. You know, an interesting thing when it comes to harvesting, you know, when it's disposal in the lake, those nutrients aren't actually leaving the lake. Whereas this is a project that does look to actually get those nutrients out of the lake. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Okay, Alyssa, what is the plan to restore the grass in the south end of the lake near South Bay? We have lost thousands of acres of grass that have vanished from the south end of the lake over the past 5 years.
So quite a bit of I'm not sure if you mean the emergent or the submersed grass, but the emergent grass was lost when we had high water and Hurricane Irma. It ripped up quite a bit of that. And while some of it did come back with the lower lake levels, obviously we would like more to come back. And we have tried planting in the past, things like bulrush and Kissimmee grass. Unfortunately, on a lake like Okeechobee, because we get such big waves, these planting projects don't often do well, because a lot of those plants are on the outside edge and they get ripped up before they ever get a chance to establish. So, and when the lake gets low, they naturally tend to come back on their own, and there's generally no need to plant at that point.
Okay, Alyssa, why don't you wait until why don't you wait until the lake is lower to burn?
So typically we do quite a bit of burning when the lake is low. Last year we burned over 20,000 acres, cooperating with Saltwater Water Management District, and the year before we burnt over 13,000 acres. This particular year, because the lake is high, we don't expect to be able to do a lot of burning. We did burn today because it's an area where we had done a treatment of cattail back in November. And so this cattail was brown. And so even though it was over the water, it was able to be burned. So it's pretty much the only area on the lake that can be burned right now. And but when the lake gets low again, particularly the inner marsh, we will start burning there. And then if the lake gets very low, we will continue to burn further out again.
All right, thank you. Ryan, do you feel the stakeholders have trust issues with you? If so, how can this be improved?
Yeah, so I think that's, one of the core issues or items that really drives why we're engaging in these management plans. I think it's a clear metric looking at that survey of displeasure with FWC's management. In improving that trust is something we definitely want to improve with these lake management plans. And the way that I envision us being able to do that is, full transparency of how we write these management plans based on stakeholder input, where we're trying to use that input in our management. We're hearing loud and clear that folks want us to utilize harvesters more often. They want to see less herbicide use. We want to find ways that we can do that while still maintaining fish and wildlife habitat, the flood control, and everything that goes into managing a lake as big and complex as Lake Okeechobee. So, that is really one of our main focuses.
All right, thank you. Danielle, I understand that FWC intentionally left areas in the lake untreated in 2020. What was the result?
Yeah, I'll start off and then I'm gonna let Brendan chime in because he's out there almost every day. But yes, we have an area that we're working with stakeholders. We are leaving floating plants, water hyacinths, water lettuce on Bird Island. We've set up monitoring areas to monitor the impacts to the vegetation. We've also have another area where we're managing, it's a very similar area where we're managing plants that we're monitoring as well. And then I'm going to let Brendan chime in about kind of the conditions and what he's seen throughout that project, because he's been part of collecting the data.
Sure. So the project is still ongoing, so we don't have final numbers, but we did take multiple transects across different environments. We were looking at dense bulrush patches, as well as sparse bulrush patches, as well as SAV, so eelgrass beds, things like that. So we have several transects that go through each of those different kind of habitat types, so to speak, around Bird Island, as well as up kind of a little bit southwest of Kings Bar, rather. So we monitor that every few months. We go out to Bird Island, and we also go out to our other sites that do get sprayed, so that eventually long-term we'll be able to compare that data. One small thing that we have noticed that made it a little bit difficult on Bird Island when it comes to at least one of those transects is that we did have, because we're letting the floating plants build up there, it created kind of about a 5 to 10 acre or so tussock of floating plants and other vegetation that did kind of rip off the shoreline during a heavy wind event and kind of moved it right over the top of part of the SAV bed around the lake, or around the island rather. So that was at least one thing we did see there, as well as other small invasives starting to make their way into the hyacinths that are starting to grow around the island. We found a really bad invasive fern called the Zola pinnata that was around in and around the hyacinths around that island, which is one of our EDRR species.
All right, thank you. Just a reminder, we've got about 12 minutes until 8. We have a lot of really great comments and questions coming in, trying to get to as many of those as possible. But again, if you don't hear your question or comment get addressed, we will have everything included in the notes, and it'll go on the project record, be taken into consideration. And then we're also recording this meeting, which will be available for viewing at a later date. Okay, Ryan, question for the contracted facilitator. If DEP is responsible for water quality and water quality is essential for management of the lake, why are they not on this call to answer questions?
Yeah, very good question. You know, our hope with this public meeting was to provide updates to the public on the management planning process that FWC is engaging within our jurisdiction. You know, where we are, input we've received so far, ways for folks to be involved on subsequent drafts in the future. You know, we do have attendees with other managing agencies involved in the process and viewing the webinar tonight. So they are involved within the process as we are involved in their management planning efforts, such as LOSM, such as nutrient management projects as well. But you know, with the focus on FWC's lake management planning efforts, that's why we have FWC staff on here to address questions. Now, a lot of the questions about water quality, water management, you know, we can obviously follow up with our partner agencies there and let them know that, you know, these are the questions, comments that we are receiving.
Okay, thank you. All right, Alyssa, John Monty would like to know, do you have water quality comparisons from when the lake had an abundant amount of hydrilla prior to the hurricane to today, where there is a small amount comparatively speaking?
So we don't collect that type of water quality data on the lake. South Florida Water Management District does. However, we did, you know, IPM may have been doing some monitoring in the Bird Island area where there has been hydrilla. But we also do have submerged plants growing on parts of the lake. But I would refer that question probably to the district, because they do collect water quality on a regular basis. But one thing we have noticed in that area that you're probably referring to is the Sheeting Bay area, is that water is a lot more turbid than it used to be. And so even though the lake did get low, it did not get low enough, and the water was still very turbid in that area, and light penetration did not really make it to the bottom in a lot of those areas. Previously, back in 2007, 2008, when we had a drought, the lake got very low in that area, which really allowed the hydrilla to take back off all throughout. And so when 2017 came through and Irma came through, it ripped up all that hydrilla. And it's been coming back in certain parts of the lake, but generally not in a lot of places. Eelgrass has been coming back primarily, and a little bit of pondweed here and there.
All right, thank you. Okay, Alyssa, this is from John Blackburn. Is it not possible to reintroduce cattle onto the lake as they used to be? If we're going to mechanically remove vegetation and feed it to the cattle, why not shorten that supply chain?
So I guess there's a couple answers to that question. A majority of the plants that we do harvest out of the lake are floating plants. And so those are in sometimes fairly deep water and pretty far out into the lake. So it's probably pretty deep for most cows, and it's a lot of areas where you have boat traffic anyway. But in the interior marsh, cows are not very selective. So they will eat not only your torpedo grass, but they will eat all your native plants that you're trying to have in that area. And then when they do eat your non-native plants, they'll spread that seed, the rhizomes, all throughout the rest of your marsh that perhaps didn't already have it. So while it is used in some areas, generally have to supplement with herbicide anyway, because they're spreading a lot of seed.
All right, Mark, how much is duck hunting taken into account in this management plan?
So duck hunting is going to be just as important as bass fishing and local business and everything else. You know, I encourage duck hunters to stay engaged and lobby for what they want. As far as high quality duck habitat, I know I'm going to be, you know, engaging with the public and with the group internally to lobby for duck habitat. And you know, that's our goal through this whole plan is to provide the highest quality habitat possible for all fish and wildlife and for the people, which is you guys that use the lakes.
All right, thank you. Danielle, using scientific methods, has bycatch data been recorded for the recent use of harvesters to control invasive aquatic plants?
Yeah, I think we touched on this a little bit. We've done bycatch data, and yes, there is some bycatch with harvesting, but you know, not a significant amount where we feel like it would impact the populations on the lake. So of course there can be bycatch, but you know, it's not significant where it's going to affect populations. We did work with the Army Corps on a project this year, and they looked at bycatch, and it really wasn't significant.
All right, and Danielle, does FWC spray non-native plants in residential canals, or is that the responsibility of the homeowners?
So FWC, yes, residential canals, we will manage only, you know, those most problematic species, water hyacinths, water lettuce, if there is a threat to, you know, go into an area that we're managed or infest an area that we're managed, but we do not manage any other plants in residential canals, or don't tend to, only the plants that we are managing on the lake to prevent them from infesting a managed area.
Okay, thank you. Ryan, this question is, we are in Davenport, Florida. Horse Creek flows to Peace River and continues south to Lake O, right? When Polk County approves the filling of the floodplain wetlands north of Lake O, will this filling push more water to Lake O?
Yeah, so that's an item that we'll need to check back with our folks working in that area, in the Polk County area, to see what particular they are mentioning there. But we can make sure to follow up with the individual that had asked that question and get an answer for them.
All right, thank you. I think we have time for maybe one more. Okay, Alyssa, I was wondering why, after keeping the water levels so low and getting some vegetation back, why it has remained so high all winter. We have lost a lot of vegetation since last fall. If we could have just got the lake into the 14s earlier, this vegetation would have survived. Also, I was wondering if Kissimmee Toho is being looked at for algae blooms since we get water from them. I've been up there twice this winter, including last week, and saw major algae blooms both times and have seen none on Okeechobee all winter.
The water levels, as noted before, it is controlled by Corps of Engineers. However, there is an interagency group that does talk about this usually a few times a month and makes recommendations to the Corps of Engineers. And we have made recommendations that we want the lake to be usually between 12 and 15 for the year. And there has been a variety of factors that have gone into keeping the lake a little higher this year. You'd probably have to address most of those questions to the Corps, but they are following the current regulation schedule. And, you know, so if, again, participating in LAWSOM is the best way to make changes in the current regulation schedule to improve upon that, so that we can be in a better position for this spring and perhaps not have lost so much of our emergent vegetation due to the higher waters this year.
All right, and Mason, there have been a lot of questions about plant management tonight. What other management activities are there other than plant control?
Sure, that's a great question. You know, kind of looking at the broad scope of what we can include in our management plan as we and everybody thinks about the goals and objectives that we can create in the plan. We can, you know, when you look at the survey tonight, we only showed a few key highlights, but we did ask a lot of questions, and I think, like mentioned, we will have a full suite of the full summary of those questions on the web, and you can kind of see the diversity of questions. But fisheries management, we're looking at a lot of different fisheries management questions. So as we are getting information from the public, as we're developing this plan, we've heard a lot about non-native fish, such as tilapia, the sailfin armored catfishes. There are fisheries management techniques. There are, you know, a lot of people are happy with current regulations. However, that regulations are a potential option some people have been interested in. So plant management is you know, of obvious importance and interest to a huge proponent of stakeholders, but we also are receiving a lot of great information, great ideas about other things that we at FWC can do as well. So keep them coming, and hope you guys can keep engaging with us.
All right, great, Mason, thank you. I just want to reiterate that we've had a lot of really great questions and comments coming in tonight. Did our best to get to as many different questions as possible. It's now 8 p.m., but we will have a recording of the video on our YouTube channel and available for viewing, as well as the Q&A, and we'll answer any questions that we weren't able to get to in that document. And that will be published as well. That's it. Ryan, do you have anything else?
Yeah, I'll just thank everyone for their attendance at this virtual meeting tonight. You know, we definitely look forward to a day where we can meet in person again as we collectively move through this pandemic. And we look forward as well to presenting drafts of these management plans and the focus group feedback sessions that are to come. So again, I want to thank you all for your time attending and listening and well thought out questions. And I hope you have a great evening.
All right, thank you everyone for attending. My organizers ask that you just stay on the line for just a moment while I save the questions, and I will conclude the meeting. Everyone have a great night.